Thanks for joining us for this. I'm Steve Kemp, Open Plan. I see my name's disappeared, but that's who I am. Chris is from Green Life Buildings. He's the managing director, and he's going to be one of the panelists, as is John, who is from University of Lincoln, something called DVC. I'm not sure what your director of, John.
It's Deputy Vice Chancellor. So I work for
yeah,
Deputy Vice Chancellors as a project manager, project director.
Also joining us is my friend and colleague from Italy, Simone, who's sitting down in the bottom left-hand corner. And welcome to those of you I don't know so well. I think I do know Jane from past work. I don't know you, David. But hopefully we'll do by the end of the session. The discussion topic that we wanted to look at this morning was really this one of remoteness and how the situation regarding remote communities is changing. Lincolnshire has been regarded, or has regarded itself, I suppose, as a fairly remote community for decades, probably, centuries even, I don't know. And has always seen that as a challenge and has been making efforts to better rail links and everything else to try and overcome that. And there's been constant discussions about motorway links and all sorts of things. The work that we do is mostly either in Lincolnshire as a sort of remotish community or over in the Caribbean on small islands, which are definitely remote communities. One of the things that's emerged from the current crisis, that hopefully is diminishing now, is that actually in some ways the scales have been tipped a little bit more in favour of remote communities. So communicating the way that we are makes remoteness much less of an issue. At the same time, I think some recent studies, and John drew my attention to this, but I see the Lincolnite picked up on it yesterday. Recent studies are showing that places like Lincolnshire, from what we know now, might not have needed to shut down in the same way. So the lockdown, if it hadn't been nationwide, and there were reasons why it was, but the lockdown could have been much more regionalised. Perhaps moving forward, because this isn't going to go away very quickly, can be more regionalised. And Lincolnshire is one of the places where the studies seem to show that it could have been dealt with on a much more localised basis, and actually Lincolnshire could have continued to function. I'm not sure whether that applies right across the county, but it's something we need to look at. So I think the other thing that sort of this is going to run into the back or the front of, depending on which way you look at it, is the whole climate change emergency situation and what we really need to do to adjust to that. And some of the things that we're learning now are going to help us with that. I think there might be a sort of period of adjustment where we try to go back to the old world and find it's not quite what we want now. And so we then make some more radical changes. Chris, I know, has got a lot of ideas about energy efficiency, energy self-sufficiency, and I think both food and energy self-sufficiency are going to be big issues to the future. And we need to try and build communities that are self-sufficient, resilient, adaptable, and can still function, and they do so by different types of connectivity. So that's sort of basically the introduction. A few questions that we want to sort of try and touch on. Are we suddenly seeing remoteness becoming an advantage? If so, what adjustments and investments need to be made to make the most of this whilst we make the big transition to net zero carbon economy and lifestyles? Can places like Lincolnshire achieve a greater degree of self-sufficiency in energy and food? Can we reshape our cities and towns and villages to serve communities that commute less and work more from home? Can we make the most of the digital technology to jump forward to a green economy? And what do we need to be doing now to achieve all of those possible futures? What should we stop? What should we start? What should we continue? That's sort of the introduction. I think for a few minutes, Chris and John and I can sort of have a little discussion, but then I mean, there's so few of us in the room. We may as well just have an open discussion anyway. But I'll pick on Chris and John to start with. So, John, have you got any thoughts to get us going?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think it's really interesting. The issue about is Lincolnshire's remoteness now at worst no longer a disadvantage, or could we turn it into a positive? And it's about where do we invest in the future in terms of infrastructure, because there's always, as you said, been a lot of emphasis on improving the roads, improving the ability to move around the county and also get out in and out of the county. But does that matter so much anymore? Should the investment be in broadband, in providing the facilities in local communities? I also think there's an interesting issue for the viability of places that have been struggling. So small towns, larger villages, which have seen shops close, have seen their last pub close, etc. Actually, if there are more people working from home, and I saw brilliant expression in an article right at the beginning of the lockdown where somebody said people's worlds have shrunk to walking distance. So if people are more reliant on what's in their immediate neighbourhood, does that actually give impetus for those small towns, larger villages to see a renaissance of local shops and services, because there will be more people based in the local area? I think that has pretty big implications for places like Lincoln. If people who currently work in the city decamp and spend most of their time working from home outside of Lincoln, what does that mean for the viability of city centres and larger towns? I think there's also a question about future housing development. I mean, I don't know about everybody else's arrangement. I'm currently sitting in what is our son's bedroom. He no longer lives here, so I'm sitting in my son's bedroom, which I've turned into an office. Other people I know, and I can look at the 5 other screens, people are sat at dining tables, kitchen tables. Actually, if more people are going to work from home, and if we're going to enable people who can't currently work from home because their job doesn't lend itself to it because of their facilities, what does that mean about the future of housing design, community design, place design, so that more people can benefit from this? And I suppose my last point is the digital divide. This is all very well, but what about people who can't afford broadband, can't afford the latest tech, can't engage in this? Are they actually going to be excluded? You're muted, Steve.
Thanks, John. Chris, what thoughts have you got?
Well, it's a nice segment because, as you know, Steve, we go back 20 years in trying to develop local infrastructure, whether that be for waste, renewables, green living. And Lincolnshire, I actually, although I was born in Zimbabwe, I grew up in Grimmelby and Manby, which is in the middle of nowhere. So what we had there, though, is bigger homes with gardens. So we could be, I think every home had a small allotment patch, growing stuff. So this local for local is quite important. If we're going to spend more time at home, because we can, and I think COVID has shown that you can have staff work from home and deliver reliably. And they get more productivity, even though they might work less hours. Their efficiencies are up. But to do that, you do need that infrastructure. And actually, I do a lot of work from home because the infrastructure at my office is so poor for broadband, so it hasn't worked in this current bit because it's only 1 to 3 megabit upload and download. It's ridiculous. So my phone has a better service than the broadband. But we should be looking at homes that are fit for life, and we don't. People build homes fit for profit, and there's a completely different setup.
Yeah.
We can be greener. We should be building homes that are greener by default, so that the hard work isn't the homeowner's choice. And in this lockdown, 40,000 homes haven't been built that should have been built. We're already 150,000 homes short anyway a year. So you've just added another 40,000 that have been delayed. So the pressure is there. And what I don't want is see that pressure go into just the cheapest smallest, quickest. We want people to develop homes that genuinely live work. And there's examples around the world. Steve, you're probably doing it on the islands, but I know New Zealand had genuine live work industrial zones. So every plumbing shop or DIY store had a manager's flat. And in the evening, there was a restaurant, a post office, and it was a community. So it was always clean, always tidy. And the traffic flow was limited. You didn't have cars coming in and then cars going out at peak times. And I think if we can get some more of that, and Lincolnshire is good for that, you know, you've got a good rural community that generally work from home anyway, or on their farms. Most businesses could have people at least one day a week work from home. They don't need to be in.
And that makes a big difference, doesn't it?
It does. It makes a huge difference, whether it's for childcare, so family stability, mental well-being, the whole lot, you know, comes together. Just, you know, I could pick on dads, but I could also pick on mums. Mums not having to be full-time workers and mums all the time, giving that space and overlap makes a massive difference.
So as far as commuting is concerned, one day a week for everybody, that's a 20% cut in. Yeah.
20%, you could easily, but I don't think it's a 20% loss of resource at all. But you come back to the spend. My local post office, there's queues, not just because of COVID, but because, like you say, there are people that want to go and do stuff that they wouldn't normally do, or they would do it where they're based at work. So the big centres get that spend, local spend. Your village shop, your own town centre can get that village shop. So we like to promote what we call a local for local. And that should be a brand next the whole country.
And that's something that planners need to be looking at, placemakers need to be looking at, how you sort of start to restructure even smallest settlements a bit to enable that.
Yes.
Simone, can I bring you in from Italy?
Steve, can I just interrupt? I'm really sorry. I'm getting messages from someone saying their meeting rooms aren't working. So it looks as though I'm ignoring you, and I don't mean to. But do you mind if I just dip out, because I need to try and sort it out? Is that okay? Yeah, sorry. Nice to meet you all. But I think I need to.
Fine. Enjoying it.
Okay. This is a very select group now. So Simone, tell us about the Italian experience.
Well, I wouldn't really know, in the sense that we don't have as remote communities, possibly as England does, as Lincolnshire does. Lincolnshire is very sparsely populated and not particularly dense compared to Italy. We have pretty much the same size as the UK, but large chunks of it, they're mountainous and very rugged, so we don't really build there. So our communities are probably more connected, at least by road. So there's been that component there. But from my experience in Lincolnshire, I actually see the benefit of more remoteness. I mean, transforming remoteness into something that make it work for small villages. But definitely there is a component of infrastructure. So there is a component of connectivity to the broadband, which is really poor in some villages. But there's also a good example right on the other side of the River Trent. Steve and I work in Fiskerton Coomorton, which is a small community that was not served by fiber optic broadband, and decided to install it themselves, organizing the village as a community group that brought the fiber in. And initially it was a big investment for the village. It's a really affluent community. But eventually, it's way cheaper to have a subscription such as that one than not relying on big broadband and internet providers. So there is opportunities to bring the hardware in, the infrastructure in, on a community-based level. So there are good examples of that could, on the one hand, bring the community together to provide that service, and eventually it gets even cheaper. And on the other end, what has been said is absolutely important. Working within the building, so designing houses that have dedicated space for work, because yes, we have adapted, we have worked in our kitchens, we have worked in our dining rooms, but there's not there's not the ideal place to work. And if we start designing specific rooms for that, we will be even more productive. And designing our villages for that. So small villages needs to get back the nurseries and the daycare for kids, because you can't work in a house where you have like 2-year-olds and a 5-year-olds running around. Is not ideal.
Good point. Oh, so David, you're doing that, are you?
Yeah, well, my wife's currently on maternity, due to return shortly, but that is going to be tricky to manage. I mean, we've worked remotely since lockdown, and have opened our offices more recently with skeleton staff, 1 day a week almost for a handful of people into each of the offices. I came into this group knowing nothing realistically. I just wanted to almost challenge myself, almost have a conversation with people about a topic that I don't know a great deal about, and maybe learn from your experiences and your views. I'm intrigued by the conversation about, I suppose, the purpose of new homes, and what the foundation they should be built on. I think that's a really interesting topic, and it's surprising actually, given what you said, to learn that it's not something that's commonly thought about now. As Chris said, it's building homes for profit rather than building homes for life, and there's no reason why there can't be synergy, I don't suppose, between those two, but maybe the emphasis ought to change how we drive that change.
Chris, do you want to tell us a bit more about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, because if you're lucky enough to want to build your own home, you see the value of your home based on what its value is to you, that extra space. You wouldn't go and design a standard home is 4.8 meters wide by probably 8.6 to 9 meters long. Okay, that's a shocking amount of space to try and bring up a family. That's a 3-bedroom home, by the way. It's a shocking amount of space that's to put 3 people in, 5 people in, and then we waste it, because most of them have a loft, so they don't utilize the space. So when you look at why houses are built the way they are, it's because we use timber a lot, and if you try and make a timber home a flat roof, the spans get so big, the stresses on the timbers get larger and deeper, so they make it an apex and then fill it with nothing, junk. So we're all having up too much junk. So part of the design is to say to people, look, make use of that space. Find materials, and obviously we use a very lean production system that uses a small amount of concrete, because here's the first thing: concrete's not the undesirable construction product. It has the lowest carbon footprint. It's even lower than wood. So you end up in this situation where the community's perception, and even those in the industry, is that concrete's bad, wood is good. The reality is it's completely the other way around. Steel is really bad. Bricks are bad from a carbon footprint, and they don't deliver what you want. Bricks just give you a finish. If you want space, if you want to be in the ground or above the ground, if you don't want to impact the ground, why do we dig foundations? We're way beyond needing a foundation in this typical sense.
Very quickly, tell us how we avoid that.
Well, you avoid that by having an insulated concrete slab that is self-supporting. So don't destroy the earth, compact it as you need to, and place on. Most of the time, this is a planning thing as well. They worry about that extra 200 mil on your roof height, because planners have this obsession with visual interference or visual impact. And the scheme of things, it doesn't make a difference. That 200 mil is not going to make a difference. So we shouldn't be digging in.
Are there any other countries where, let's say, the planning and the design allows for that type of? It
used to be. So I spent a lot of time in New Zealand. I spent a lot of time in Malaysia and Italy. And one of the things I loved about New Zealand in the past was you could never see 2 homes that were the same, and that they recycle the home. So you would go to a home auction like you go for a car, and on a truck comes this 100-year-old timber frame building You bid on it and they drive it to where you want it and they plonk it on. They don't sit it in foundations. But for their speed, they're now building what we call Coronation Street. Instead of having space between them, they're now having streets because it's easier to collect rubbish. So all those other services that people expect, rubbish collection, postal office, broadband, now will make people align themselves living next door to each other. And then you get continuity of build, which I think is horrible. I love diversity. But as soon as a contractor's there, they're on about profit. They're on about what is right for their system. They don't want 10 different designs. They want one stock design, which may look different because they've got a green brick rather than a blue brick, if you like, on the outside. So it's getting back to governments, councils, specifies architects to say there you can have architectural freedom without a cost burden or an environmental burden. But that means ditching some of the things we've done for 100 years or 300 years.
But I think I absolutely agree, Chris, and I think as Steve knows and Simone knows, I used to work for the City Council in Lincoln and was the director responsible for planning. So I've been on the other end of this as well. I think some of this is about changing the mindset of the big volume builders, because as you say, they build for profits and they come in, and I can think of a number of Section 106 negotiations I've had with developers where they're starting, our starting point, we want a profit margin of 20%, 25%. So when they say we can't afford to put in community infrastructure, what they mean is we don't want to take less than a 20% profit margin.
Right. Yep.
Not that they can't afford it, it's just that it eats into their profit. I think there's also something about trying to change consumers' mindset. And I think COVID will do that, because for a long time, houses have been sold on, well, every bedroom's got an ensuite bathroom and there's a double garage and yada, yada. And I actually think, back to your point about Lincolnshire homes in the past that had a garden and an allotment plot and this somewhere to work, I think consumers' preferences will shift. And actually what they value if they're buying a brand new house will be, have I got a garden? Have I got some space to work if I'm working from home? Because those are the things that are going to be more important than every bedroom's got an ensuite bathroom or there's a utility room or there's...
And it's price point, but that does mean we've got to allow space. So a plot cannot be 10 meters wide, It's plots. I always we grew up in a council house in Lincolnshire. It was a farm building. Biggest house, that we had lived in for the first 20, 30 years. We moved to Cambridge and that was a completely different situation. So I do think we should be, by design, building, we should have a minimum size which is bigger than it is currently.
Which is much more common on the continent, I think, in places like Italy and France. Whenever I've been in a European country, one of the things I've noticed in their real estate agents is, rather than saying this is a 3-bedroom house or whatever, it'll say there is X number of square meters of space.
Yeah.
Because they're not selling it as a X bedroom house or a 2 reception. They're selling it as, this is the amount of living space that you can.
So actually, we need more space for individual living houses, and we need at the same time to get the density that you need for social interaction in the neighbourhoods and villages, because we want people to be able to get the things that they need together on a day-to-day basis.
But we do, but part of that, Steve, is tackling head-on this notion that the UK is already overdeveloped.
Which is...
I mean, whatever it is, it's. I think it's 5% of the land mass or something is built on.
And if they just...
And once you take out roads and a few other things, actually, we're not overdeveloped. We're not crowded.
If 1%...
poorly designed. I think some of our places are really poorly designed, and it's depressing when I drive past, and I'm not going to name builders, but you drive past new development estates being put up by a volume house builder. I find them really depressing, because there's that semblance of diversity, but actually it's uniformity.
Yeah.
They're not putting in the green infrastructure. I mean, to see a new house being built now and to know that it's not carbon neutral is depressing, really. So we've got to think about how we use land completely differently, I think.
That's where the planners have to get involved in a way. If they're going to be involved, it's not about what it looks like. It should be more about what it is actually made of. And, you know, where they used to build, you know, Peterborough's been quite good at when they've built community centres, business centres or villages, smaller than new townships, every one has had community hubs integrated into them. So, you know, round the corner at Southgate, the unit would have a central business hub, which would have all the photocopies of the reception room and everything else. So that you didn't replicate it 10 times. When you had clients, you could go from your little workshop unit, take them into that. And I think if we got that live work sort of design complex going on, where you have your home, but you know there's a business drop-in centre you can utilise, which has everything you need, you know, it functions better. And it is that social networking, you know, and that also can be the library, you know. Digital's wonderful, but I still want people to be able to connect with what is real. And books are real, people are real. Sitting down having a coffee with people is real.
So you need that. So, you need that opportunity for serendipitous encounters.
Like us meeting on a train.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we had two things. Chris and I met on a train 20-something years ago, and we were at the time going through journeying up from London. And every time I go on the train from London to Lincoln, I'm struck by exactly what you were saying, John. We've got this myth that we've got an overdeveloped country, and you go through hardly anywhere on the way between London. It's just fields.
But, that's an interesting point. You mentioning the train. I mean, I do think it's an interesting question for the country as a whole. And I have a personal view about this anyway. But is the investment in HS2 really viable now?
No. Never was.
Well, I agree, Chris. I don't think it ever was. I think shaving 20 minutes off the journey time from London to Birmingham when you've got a rubbish broadband on the train.
I agree. My immediate sort of thought is, well, why don't we divert that into proper
building better places?
And digital technology. Although I noticed you were saying that we have to be careful about the side of it, because that's got its own greenness.
Yeah, I hate to tell you that cloud sources now outweigh the airlines for pollution. Okay, so everybody thinks stuff goes up into the cloud. Well, cloud data centers need roughly between 20 and 50 megawatts of electrical power for cooling and consumption, and it's primarily run on gas as a backup gensets. So the cloud is not as green as they would like to make out. So it's something they're very worried about when the public know. So we see a plane, we think it's dirty. You see data and you think, oh, it's clean, because disappears.
But
more of these.
That's down to how we generate. Oh, right, okay. So it's not just generating the power.
Yeah, so you create the power.
Right.
But the data needs cooling. Data centers run at 19 to 21 degrees all year round. So they have to be cooled. And it's that energy for cooling.
So many challenges and so little time. Unfortunately, we need to get back to the main room, I think. Because I'm not quite sure how they were supposed to tell us this, and clearly we didn't start on time, but I'm sort of trying to watch what's going on there as well. It looks as if people are starting to assemble. Got a couple of minutes. David, have you got anything more you wanted to add, or Simone?
Just a real quick thing about what Chris said, that planners need to start looking at how houses are built rather than how they look. And I completely agree with that. The problem there, among all other problems, is that we are not formed to do that. We are not taught almost anything about construction techniques and construction materials. We're taught a lot about architecture, appearance. We're taught a lot about urban design as planners, but we don't really study too much anything that goes with carbon neutral, except the very basics of it.
And then it's wrong.
It's a problem. I absolutely agree. It's a problem. And I think it's always seen as too technical for planners, which is seen as a technical field, but not a field that should go into anything engineering or anything that involves any maths or any equation or anything that it gets to that point. and it's a problem. It's definitely a problem.
I think from my personal perspective, I live in a village which it has these developments on the outskirts of the village, which has increased its the village's size, and there's currently an application for more housing to be built on another side of the village, which has not been well received by the current residents of the village, as they see it as it will mean that the village can't then meet the additional capacity of, you know, additional children into the village. There's not enough room in the school, and there's not enough amenities to kind of facilitate everyone. And I do wonder if there was a shift in let's say the way that the builders were going about their planning applications and looking at other things that they could actually do with their housing developments, that perhaps there would be less resistance from other residents in the village, because they would see an additional benefit rather than just it being a burden of more of the same coming in.
Good design would help, but the major builders don't do that. That, unfortunately, they are just volume. Which housing association will buy from them? You know, the price is getting squeezed, the quality is getting worse, and the only thing I can say is we are getting a few coming to us from the volume side, because we have a product that can maintain their price point. But what we're trying to say is, don't maintain that price point and absorb the profit. Add something back. There are so many good things that you could put in: low energy heating systems in your wall. So your wall is your radiator, not the thing hanging off of it. And make use of your thermal and solar mass. We're going to get hotter as the years go on. The UK will go through colder zones and hotter zones. If we continue to build in the way we have looking backwards, we'll not be compliant. And the only thing we'll do to solve that is add more consumption, more pollution as an add-on fix, when we could start by making your fabric of the building right to start with, you know. And that's, you know, the Romans got it right all those years ago. We just have to go back there and remember how they achieved it.
Well, thank you for that. I think that's good.
That's as a Roman city, that's a good note to end on, really, isn't it?
Okay, well, thank you for that. Obviously, we could go on forever, and I think in a lot of ways we should do. So perhaps we find other ways of having this conversation and continuing it.
Yeah.
The time